As we are in the process of wrapping up the last 2 weeks of the season of Easter, we return to that last week in Jesus' ministry. And if we reference all of the Gospels for this broader picture of what was going on that last week, we can read in Matthew that Jesus being questioned by the scribes as to what is the greatest commandment. And Jesus gave this answer. The greatest commandment is to love your God with all of your heart, all of your mind, and all of your soul. And a second one, which is like the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. And all the other commandments are built on these two. Well, the first part of his answer is based on reality, the first four commandments of the Ten Commandments. And then the second part of Jesus' answer encompasses the last 6 commandments from the tablet that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. The love your neighbor as yourself was eventually written into the book of Leviticus. Now, to tell you the truth, I have always had an issue with this part of Jesus' answer. To love yourself as, to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't have an issue with the first part of love your neighbor. What I have the issue with is the second half, as yourself. The reason that I am bothered by this is, what if you don't like yourself very well? How are we supposed to then love our neighbor appropriately? The law is assuming that you have a healthy positive self-image. But what if we don't have that positive self-image? What if we are, what are we supposed to draw upon in order to know how to love our neighbor in the way that the law is suggesting? I suspect the obvious answer comes from doing what Jesus did in his ministry. Perhaps a more practical way in which to think about this comes from the phrase, do as you would have others do unto you. That sounds a little more reasonable. This seems more understandable, as it doesn't really rely on one's self-image so much, but rather practical boundaries of social behaviors. As an example, we've all seen how cruel children can be toward another child when it seems to be different than the general group of kids. I recall how my mother used to emphasize the importance of treating everyone with respect and with friendship, no matter how difficult it may seem, and not to buckle against the attitudes of the other kids around me in order to be a part of that in-group. As I think back upon those early lessons from my mother, I often wonder if Mom, who happened to be an extremely good-looking, vivacious, intelligent, and very outgoing person, might at one time thought of herself as being an outsider, and that through her training would ensure that I would not treat anyone as the outsider. And in truth, I suspect that no matter how positive of self-image we may have of ourselves, somewhere deep down, we might have that thought of ourselves as being a bit of an outsider as well. So, in this morning's reading, we find Jesus and his disciples in the place where they were having their last meal. If we jump back to the beginning of the chapter of this reading, we will read that Jesus, at the beginning of their meal, knelt down to wash each of his disciples' feet. It is a practice by some of a Maundy, Thursday worship service where we get down on our knees and wash each other's feet. It also happens to be something that I find very hard to do myself. because it is such an intimate act. Jesus explains to Peter, so Peter must have thought the same thing as he was refusing to have Jesus wash his feet. So Jesus, has to explain this to him, what it was, the necessity for him to have to do this as a tool for teaching. So Peter, in his usual form of excess, says, well, why don't you just give me a whole bath then? Peter, once again, initially missed the meaning that Jesus was trying to teach his disciples. So after Judas leaves the dinner to inform Caiaphas, the high priest, of where he could find Jesus later that evening, Jesus gives a new commandment to his disciples, saying, love each other just as much as I have loved you. By doing this, everyone will know that you are truly my followers. You just have to love Peter. Or he once again jumps up to his feet and says, what do you mean I'm not able to go where you're going to be going? I would sacrifice and die for you. And then Jesus brings back some reality to Peter's enthusiasm, saying, would you really, Peter, would you really lay down your life for me? What a way to put a damper on a dinner party. Jesus altered the original Leviticus law, the one he recited to the scribes, to not loving our neighbor as ourselves, but rather love each other as much as Jesus has loved us. Now, I can understand this commandment as healthier than the Leviticus law, as it does not depend on my self-image as a way to relate to other people. Not only that, it is consistent with what my mother was trying to teach me in how to honor each person that I would meet in my life. So, the question that this brings up is this: what does love mean in this context? How do we love others in the way that Jesus loved his disciples? This, I believe, is a question that churches that are not growing need to honestly ask themselves. What does Jesus mean? We are to love each other as Jesus loves us. Well, there are hundreds of examples throughout all four Gospels that give us the practical practices that we can keep ourselves busy doing day in and day out. Healing the sick, feeding the hungry, giving shelter to those who need it, and even clothing those who are naked. Yet those are things that can be done without getting very involved or intimate with those that we are trying to help. I believe the true meaning of loving as Jesus is loved comes in the example of Jesus when he washed the feet of his disciples, his students. I don't mean the actual act of foot washing, but the message that comes from that act. As I said earlier, washing someone's feet is a very intimate act, but it also is an act of total humility. It is the message for us. Jesus is asking us to interact with one another in humility. And in this way, we are showing people that we are followers of Christ. This is the commandment that Jesus has given us. Yet the story continues with Peter's commitment. I'll sacrifice my life for you. And then Jesus pops the really big question when he asks, would you really lay down your life for me, Peter? That's not a question just for Peter, but to everyone who calls themselves a disciple of Christ. Would we really lay down our life for Jesus' principles? Jesus knows our humanity. He already knows that we will deny him publicly when our backs are to the wall. Yet it did not stop Jesus from going on to the cross. Of Jesus giving his life in an act of love and commitment to build God's kingdom here on earth. And as followers of Christ, we are followers of that same message. Dr. Osvaldo Vena, who happens to be the professor of biblical interpretation at Garnett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, states, "This does not give us an exclusive on the market of God's love. We should not be in competition when it comes to love, nor should we give it an object of pride. But we should be concretely and share the burden of the hurting world with people of other faiths, no matter which faith, be it Buddhism, Islamic, Judaism, Baha'i, Hinduism, Native American religious beliefs, or others that look to God as their source of life. Instead of being identified as a people of the cross, which since the Crusades has actually been identified as conquest and colonialization instead of self-sacrifice. What would happen if we were to identify as a people of the Basin and of the Tao, of humility instead of pride? Perhaps our world would be less divided and everyone would love one another just